One day, the family of a mariner Tom, his wife Julia, and two children, Cassie and Ben, set off on a yacht trip in the Caribbean Sea. While Tom and Ben are busy fishing and Cassie is absorbed in her gadgets, Julia goes for a swim. Suddenly, something disturbs her. Julia looks around, but the sea is as calm as ever. However, she feels a distinct sense of dread, as if something large and dangerous is hovering around. At the same time, the devices on the yacht start working strangely, but Tom, busy fishing, pays no attention to them. Meanwhile, Julia feels sick and eventually begins to drown. She is screaming, but the family members do not hear her voice. The water seems to carry and pull her away from the yacht. As the situation becomes critical, Tom finally hears her voice. He rushes to the helm and sails the yacht toward the distant of Julia. Tom dives into the water. With the children's help, they pull her aboard and revive her. Tom is annoyed because he always asks that swimmers notify others when they go into the water. Julia apologizes, and the incident is soon forgotten. Plus, the family has a reason to celebrate. Today is his son Ben's 13th birthday. Tom lights the candles on the cake, and everyone congratulates Ben, who receives the presents, while Cassie takes a group photo of the happy family. Just then, Casey's boyfriend calls her. He asks her about swimming, but suddenly a sudden and violent storm starts in the background. Cassie is worried, but her boyfriend assures her that he is safe. The connection is lost. Cassie tells her parents about the storm on land, but then everyone feels some jolts, runs to the deck, and notices the massive whale carcasses around the yacht. Tom explains that sometimes the whales get upset during a storm, but these animals are pushing the yacht and putting their safety at risk. Tom dives into the water and soon comes back injured. Trying to figure out what was going on, he cut himself on the propeller. Julia stitches up the cut on her husband's shoulder, and she points out that the yacht's shaft looks bent, possibly from a tail strike. They are unlikely to leave now. Later, Cassie tries to re-establish communication, but there is no signal. The radio is also not picking up any signal. Tom begins to count their belongings and supplies. There is enough water for about 4 days, no more, but they are on the sailing route, so someone is bound to find them. However, ominous noises are heard outside, and when the family goes out on deck, they see glowing objects falling from the sky. They fall closer and closer, and Tom, taking the risk, starts the engine. He manages to steer the yacht away from the next meteor, but eventually the engine breaks down. The next object comes so close that the family can see that there are satellites of the Earth. A strong wind begins to blow, and the instruments fly away. The terrified family hides inside the yacht, which is being tossed by the waves. They don life jackets and prepare for the worst when a strange, ringing sound is heard, causing a runny nose and nausea. Tom tries to signal for help with the flare gun, but it's all in vain. The family could barely make it to the morning. In the morning, they are relieved to find themselves alive, but there is a gaping hole in the side of the yacht, and it is unclear why they are still floating. The family goes outside and freezes in surprise. The water has run out, and their boat rests on a rocky outcrop in the middle of the rocky desert where the sea once was. After some time, Tom tries to reassure his family by saying that not everyone could have died. He measures and realizes that the compass is lying. The north is not where it should be. This means that the Earth's poles have changed. Something like this has happened on Earth before, but long ago. It turns out that the ocean has receded from where the land used to be, and humanity has probably perished. Casey can't handle this revelation and runs to the cabin, asking to be left alone. Julia goes to inventory the remaining supplies, while Ben releases a bunch of colorful balloons into the sky, hoping the survivors will come to their aid. Meanwhile, Tom turns on the radio, sending distress signals. Unexpectedly, he hears an answer. It's from Nato, the captain of a small submarine. They were deep underwater at the time of the disaster, and that's why they survived. However, all communication systems have failed, and it is futile to expect help. According to his calculations, the sea will return in about a week, and it will be hard. So the man advises them to find higher ground and stay there. Julia orders the children to pack their things. Tom directly asks the captain if he can save their children. Nato explains that the submarine is too small. Unfortunately, Nato's partner died, and he can only take one person. After some persuasion, Tom convinces Nato to pick up the two children, and he provides his coordinates. Tom charts a course on a nautical chart and promises to reach the point in a day or two. The next morning, the family is almost ready to go on their journey. Tom steps onto the deck and suddenly sees a man approaching with a dog. He walks towards him and greets him, but notices that the man is injured. He offers water to the traveler. The man drinks it and then suddenly punches Tom in the face, which Julia sees. She rushes to her husband as the traveler thrusts a makeshift spear into Tom's chest. The dog keeps Julia away, though she freezes in fear herself. Realizing that there is no one to save her husband, she runs to the boat. The man chases after her, injuring her arm. Nevertheless, Julia climbs onto the deck, and the children, hearing her screams, run to her aid. Together, they close the cabin doors. Afterwards, Julia hides Casey and Ben in a locker, giving her daughter a flare gun and instructing her to shoot him as a last resort. Meanwhile, the killer tries to break down the door and finally succeeds. Julia hides in the bathroom while she heals her wound. Once inside, the intruder heads straight to the galley and grabs some food. It is clear that he is very hungry. Holding a can of food, the man begins to search the yacht, while Julia arms herself with a kitchen knife. He enters the cabin, but the woman jumps overboard and hides under the boat. The killer peers through the hole, but doesn't see her. However, the dog attacks Julia, forcing her to kill him. The man hears the scream, goes outside, and sees the dog's body. Meanwhile, Julia climbs back onto the yacht through the portholes on the opposite side. She goes straight into the hands of the killer. He beats her, throws her onto a couch, and grabs her by the throat, intending to strangle her. Cassie sees all this and realizes that this is a last resort. She opens the locker and shoots the man. The bullet throws him aside, but the flare sets the boat on fire. Julia orders the children to run, while she hides in the galley. The killer, only wounded, tries to strike again. Julia kicks him, grabs the stuffed bags, and jumps aboard, where Ben finds his father's body. Cassie runs to the corpse and cries over it. Julia kisses her dead husband, but after seeing the murderer jump from the burning boat, she takes the children with her. The boat explodes behind them. The family flees across the rocky desert and soon takes refuge in a rocky canyon, where a stream flows. However, the water is salty and undrinkable. Cassie shares some water with her brother, but he refuses to drink. The boy feels guilty, convinced that the killer came because he saw the balloons. Cassie chimes in at the thought, but Julia orders her to stop, explaining that he didn't mean no harm. She tells the children to pull themselves together as a long journey awaits, and then she sees the killer again, still following their trail. The family moves quickly. That evening, Ben finds the carcass of a hammerhead shark and tries to butcher it, but Julia spots the pursuer and orders the kids to run. They soon come across a field of once flooded toxic waste barrels, but Julia encourages the kids to keep going despite the contamination, knowing that the killer is still hot on their heels. The family walks along the former seafloor, past piles of plastic and other trash thrown by humans. Soon, Julia notices that Ben is severely dehydrated and gives him the last drops of water. Cassie has a breakdown, convinced they have no chance of survival, but Julia orders them to move on. Eventually, they find the body of a plane that crashed in the ocean long ago and crawl in to rest. Julia examines the last photo of her family and tells the story of her first meeting with Tom, which took place at her hospital, where Tom was brought in with decompression sickness after a failed dive. Children cry, remembering their father and bidding him a final goodbye. During the night, Cassie is awakened by a noise and goes outside to sit near the plane. From the darkness, the killer approaches her, unaware that the girl is working bait. As he prepares to capture her, Julia ambushes him and stabs the man. At dawn, the family prepares to continue their journey, only to find that the killer's body has been mutilated, a sign that something more dangerous than humans lurks in the desert. They move on. Julia consults the map when Ben suddenly moves forward. His mother screams for him to stop, but the boy runs to a salt pit and manages to take a few sips. Julia drags him away, but the boy falls ill. Soon, they come across some plastic chairs and make a makeshift shelter from the sun, resting inside them. Suddenly, Julia hears strange noises. She steps outside and sees something that prompts her to wake up the children. Sensing the new threat, they start running. Soon, they see a large ship in the distance, surrounded by fallen containers and a few stragglers. Julia calls out to them, but they, seeing thousands of giant crabs, crawl into a container and close the doors, ignoring her pleas for help. The three climb onto a container, though the crabs manage to injure Julia in the leg. Nevertheless, Julia, Casey, and Ben sit on top, watching the crabs enter through a crack in the door, killing everyone inside despite the people's efforts to stop them. Julia ties a scarf around her leg and falls asleep. The next morning, she wakes up alone, nervous, and calls the children. But it turns out that the crabs have moved on, and the kids went down in search of food and weapons. Julia cleans her wound while Ben examines the weapons he found. Searching in containers, they find small amounts of food and water. In the pocket of one of the dead, Julia finds a radio and contacts Nato. He responds by explaining that it was also attacked by deep-sea arthropods. Based on his observations, the ocean will soon return, which has caused this creature to emerge. Julia begs him to save her children, but she is not sure where to go because she has lost the map. Nado lets out a flare. Ben looks in the direction, and the family runs to him. Soon, they spot a yellow submarine in the distance, but it is difficult to reach due to the former seabed area. Cassie disapproves of her mother's talk about saving the children, but Julia refuses to take no for an answer and moves the family forward. They are forced to pass through a valley contaminated with toxic waste. At one point, they get stuck in a rock slide, and Julia gets separated from the kids. She orders them to continue, and when Cassie refuses, Julia pleads with her to save her brother. Casey and Ben make it out of the canyon and reach the submarine, but inside, there's no one there. Suddenly, Nado, badly injured, emerges from the back of the boat. He recognizes that there is no chance of him surviving and orders them to board the ship, but Casey goes back to her mother, who is holding back the emerging crabs. Her bullet's nearly gone when Cassie climbs over the stone barrier and holds out her hand to her mother. They manage to reach the submarine just as the crabs overpower Nado, who dies in their clutches. The family climbs aboard, and just then an ocean wave hits the horizon. The water picks up the submarine and drags it across the rocks, and as Julia sees everything that has happened in the past few days flash before her eyes and passes out. When she wakes up, she finds the pot stopped. Julia opens the hatch, and the family emerges to find themselves in a ruined city, swept away by the tide. And that concludes our story. Thanks for watching.